This is Dimma Tower. He's 22 years old, sitting in a courtroom facing murder charges, but right now he's not just a defendant, he's breaking down, crying so hard that the judge has to stop the trial. What you're about to hear is one of the most unusual murder trials in recent history. A trial where the defense attorney isn't claiming his client is innocent. A trial where a young man's entire tragic life is on display. A trial that asks one question: when does a broken person become a criminal? It's opening statements day. The prosecution has already laid out their case. 2 people are dead. Dimma Tower killed them. The evidence is clear. Now it's the defense's turn to speak. And defense attorney Michael Gilman is about to tell a story that will shake this courtroom. Gilman stands up, he looks at the jury, and he starts with something you almost never hear from a defense attorney. He says, "If you're expecting me to stand here and say Mr. Tower is not guilty of anything, you would be incorrect." The jury looks confused. What kind of defense is this? The defendant admitting guilt, but Gilman continues. This isn't about whether Dimma did it, it's about who Dimma is and how he became this person sitting in court today. Timestamp 000130000315. Gilman tells the jury about Dimma's past. He came from Ukraine, a country at war. He was in foster care there from the time he was very young because his mother died and his family didn't want him. Think about that. Your mother dies, your family rejects you, you're a little kid, and you're put into a foster system in a war-torn country. Dimma grew up in that system. No family, no stability, no love, just survival, day after day, year after year, watching other kids get adopted while nobody wanted him. Then when Dimma was about 14 or 15 years old, 2 American strangers showed up. They decided to bring him to the United States, just like that, took him from the only country he'd ever known, even if that country didn't want him, and brought him to America. Gilman quotes something Dimma said, "I'm basically a nobody coming from nowhere." That's how Dimma Tower sees himself, a nobody coming from nowhere. Now 7 or 8 years after arriving in America, Dimma is sitting in court, charged with murder. 2 people are dead, and he admits he did it. But the question is why? What level of crime is it? First-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter. As Gilman is explaining this to the jury, something starts happening. Dimma, sitting at the defense table, begins to cry, not just tears, he's sobbing, his shoulders are shaking, he's reaching for tissues, one after another, trying to wipe his face, trying to compose himself, but he can't. The jury notices, they're watching him. Some jurors look sympathetic, others look uncomfortable. This is not normal courtroom behavior. Defendants usually sit quietly, expressionless. Their lawyers tell them to show no emotion, but Dimma can't control it. Gilman tries to continue. He's talking about premeditation, about whether Dimma had the ability to fully form intent, about mental state, about... He stops mid-sentence, because Dimma is now crying so loudly that people can't focus on the opening statement. The sound of his sobbing is filling the courtroom. Judge looks concerned. This is disrupting the trial. The jury is distracted. This isn't how court proceedings are supposed to go. Gilman glances back at his client. Dimma has his face buried in his hands, tissues piled on the table in front of him. He's completely breaking down. The judge makes a decision. He says, "Let's take a short break." He instructs the jury to leave their notepads in the courtroom. "Don't discuss anything. We'll resume shortly." The bailiff calls out, "All rise." The jury files out of the courtroom. They look confused. This trial just started and already there's a break because the defendant can't stop crying. Once the jury is gone, the judge addresses Dimma directly. His tone is firm but not angry. "Mr. Tower," he says, "I won't allow that to continue. You were showing emotion, crying, sobbing, using Kleenex. You were disrupting the jury trial." Dimma is still crying. He's trying to listen to the judge, but he's struggling to breathe through the tears. The judge continues. He explains that he spoke to the audience this morning, told them they can't show emotion in the courtroom, especially during a murder trial. If they can't handle it, they need to remove themselves, and that rule applies to everyone, including the defendant. Dimma nods weakly. He's wiping his face, trying to pull himself together. The judge says, "If you need to take a break because the emotion is too high, bring it to Mr. Gilman's attention. But we can't have any more outbursts like that in front of the jury. Do you understand, Mr. Tower?" Dimma barely responds, he's emotionally exhausted. This trial is about the worst thing he's ever done. And hearing his lawyer talk about his life, about being a nobody from nowhere, about killing 2 people, it's too much. The judge gives everyone 5 minutes, compose yourself, get it together, we're bringing the jury back. During this break, court observers are whispering, some feel sympathy for Dimma. This young man clearly has deep trauma, others think it's manipulation, crying to get the jury's sympathy, making himself look like a victim when he's the one who killed people. The prosecutors sit quietly, they're not happy about this disruption, they want the jury focused on the facts. 2 people are dead, Dimma Tower killed them, whatever his background, whatever his trauma, that doesn't excuse murder. Defense attorney Gilman talks quietly with Dimma, trying to calm him down, reminding him that they need to get through this. The jury needs to hear the full story, but they can't hear it if Dimma keeps breaking down. Dimma drinks some water, blows his nose, takes deep breaths. He knows he has to hold it together, but it's hard, so hard. 5 minutes pass, the bailiff brings the jury back in, they take their seats. Everyone's looking at Dimma, wondering if he's going to break down again. Dimma is staring at the table, his eyes are red, his face is puffy, but he's not crying anymore, at least not right now. The judge welcomes the jury back, says the defense will pick up where they left off. Gilman stands up again, he takes a breath and continues. He reminds the jury about the different levels of homicide. First-degree murder requires premeditation, planning, intent. Second-degree murder is intentional killing without premeditation. Manslaughter is killing without malice, often in the heat of passion or due to extreme emotional disturbance. Gilman tells the jury they're not here to decide if Dimma endangered lives and ended them. He did. They're here to decide what level of crime that is. Was this premeditated murder, or was this something else? He says the evidence will show that Dimma Tower was not capable of fully forming the intent required for first-degree murder. That due to his background, his trauma, his mental state, he acted in a way that constitutes manslaughter, not murder. So what actually happened? What did Dimma do? The opening statements don't give all the details yet, but here's what the case is about. On the night in question, Dimma Tower got into an altercation. Details will come out during testimony, but it involved 2 people who ended up dead. The prosecution claims Dimma intentionally killed them, planned it, executed it, murder. The defense argues something different. They say Dimma snapped. That years of trauma, years of feeling unwanted, years of struggling in a country where he didn't quite fit in, all of that came to a head. He acted out of extreme emotional disturbance, not premeditation. Witnesses will testify, crime scene photos will be shown, forensic evidence will be presented, and most importantly, mental health experts will evaluate whether Dimma had the capacity to form murderous intent. The prosecution has a strong case. 2 people are dead. Dimma admits he killed them. Physical evidence ties him to the scene. His actions that night were violent and deadly. But the defense has something too. A story. A tragic story of a boy nobody wanted who grew into a young man nobody understood. Let's go back to Dimma's childhood, because to understand this case you have to understand where he came from. Dimma was born in Ukraine in the late 1990s. His mother was young, struggling. She had him but didn't have the resources to care for him properly. When Dimma was about 3 or 4 years old, his mother died. The cause isn't clear from court records, but she was gone. That's when Dimma's extended family had to make a decision. Take in this little boy, raise him, give him a home. They said no, they didn't want to deal with it. Too much trouble, too much expense, too much responsibility. So little Dimma, barely old enough to understand what was happening, was placed in foster care. Not the kind of foster care system we have in the United States with regulated homes and oversight. This was post-Soviet Ukraine, a country dealing with corruption, poverty, and eventually war. The foster institutions were more like orphanages, crowded, underfunded, kids packed into rooms, minimal supervision, minimal education, just basic survival. Dimma grew up in that environment. He watched other kids get adopted sometimes. Families would come looking for children, but they never picked Dimma. He was always passed over, too old, too traumatized, too difficult. By the time he was a teenager, Dimma had accepted his reality. Nobody wanted him, he would age out of the system eventually and be on his own. That was his future. Then something unexpected happened. Two Americans, a couple, were looking to adopt an older child from Ukraine. They went through the system, they met several kids, and for whatever reason, they chose Dimma. He was about 14 or 15 years old. He barely spoke English. He knew nothing about American culture, but suddenly he was being taken out of the only country he'd ever known and brought to the United States. The couple who adopted him meant well, but they didn't fully understand the trauma Dimma carried. Years of abandonment, years of institutional living, years of feeling unwanted. That doesn't just go away because you're in a new country with a new family. Dimma struggled to adjust. American high school was overwhelming. The language was hard. The social dynamics were confusing. Other kids had grown up together, had friend groups, had history. Dimma was the weird foreign kid who showed up out of nowhere. He tried to fit in, but it was hard. He didn't understand references, didn't get jokes, didn't know how to interact. His adoptive parents tried to help, but they were dealing with a deeply traumatized teenager who didn't trust adults. Dimma started acting out, getting into fights at school, skipping classes, staying out late. His adoptive parents didn't know how to handle it. They tried counseling, but Dimma wouldn't open up, wouldn't talk about his feelings, wouldn't let anyone in. By the time he was 18, Dimma had essentially aged out of his adoptive family's care. He wasn't legally theirs anymore, and the relationship had become so strained that he moved out, got his own place, tried to survive on his own. But Dimma had no real skills, no education beyond a high school diploma he barely earned, no family support, no friends. He was exactly what he said, a nobody from nowhere. He worked odd jobs, fast food, warehouse work, nothing stable, nothing with a future. He was just getting by, barely. Dimma also started drinking, heavily. Alcohol was a way to numb the pain, to forget about being abandoned, to forget about being unwanted, to forget about feeling like he didn't belong anywhere. When he drank, the anger came out, all the rage he'd been holding inside since childhood, all the hurt, all the rejection, it came pouring out. He got into bar fights, got arrested a few times for drunk and disorderly conduct. Nothing major, but a pattern was forming. Dimma Tower was a young man spiraling out of control. His adoptive parents tried to reach out occasionally, but Dimma pushed them away. He didn't want their pity, didn't want their help. He'd survived this long on his own. He'd keep surviving. Except he wasn't really surviving, he was drowning, and he didn't know how to ask for help, didn't know how to reach out, didn't trust anyone enough to let them in. Then came the night that changed everything. The night two people died. The details of what happened are disputed. Different witnesses have different stories, but here's what's clear. Dimma was at a party or maybe a bar. Stories vary. He'd been drinking. A lot. He got into an argument with two other men. The argument escalated. Words turned into shoves. Shoves turned into punches. But then it went further, much further. Dimma grabbed a weapon. Accounts differ on what exactly it was, a knife or maybe a bottle or something else, but he used it, and two men ended up dead. When police arrived, Dimma was still there. He didn't run, didn't try to hide. He was sitting on the ground, covered in blood, some of it his, most of it theirs. The police arrested him, read him his rights, took him to the station. During questioning, Dimma didn't deny what he'd done. He admitted it, said he killed them. But when asked why, he couldn't really explain. It just happened. He was angry. He wasn't thinking. It all happened so fast. The prosecution built their case quickly. 2 dead bodies, multiple witnesses, physical evidence, Dimma's own confession. This was murder. Premeditated or not, it was murder. But when Dimma's public defender looked into his background, a different picture emerged. This wasn't some cold-blooded killer. This was a deeply damaged young man who'd never received proper mental health treatment, who'd never processed his childhood trauma, who'd never learned healthy coping mechanisms. The public defender brought in psychologists to evaluate Dimma. They diagnosed him with complex PTSD, attachment disorder, depression, anxiety. His entire psychological profile was shaped by abandonment and institutional trauma. One psychologist testified that Dimma had the emotional regulation skills of a child. When he got angry or upset, he didn't have adult coping mechanisms. He reverted to survival mode, fight or flight, and that night he fought. The defense argued this wasn't premeditated murder. Dimma didn't plan to kill anyone. He didn't wake up that morning thinking I'm going to take 2 lives today. He was in an altered mental state, intoxicated, emotionally dysregulated, and he snapped. But the prosecution pushed back hard. They said trauma doesn't excuse murder. Lots of people have difficult childhoods. Lots of people are in foster care. Lots of people struggle. They don't all become killers. The prosecutor pointed out that Dimma made choices that night. He chose to drink excessively. He chose to engage in the argument. He chose to grab a weapon. He chose to use it. Those are conscious decisions. That's intent. They also argued that the 2 victims didn't deserve to die. They had families, lives, futures, and Dimma Tower took that away from them. Whatever his sad backstory, that doesn't bring them back. Victim impact statements were devastating. One victim's mother testified through tears. She talked about her son, about his dreams, about planning his funeral, about the empty chair at family dinners. She looked directly at Dimma and said, "You took my baby from me. I don't care what your excuse is." The other victim's brother spoke. He was angry, said Dimma should get the death penalty, should never see freedom again, should suffer the way their family is suffering. Throughout the trial, Dimma struggled to control his emotions. He cried during testimony, especially when psychologists talked about his childhood, about being abandoned, about the foster system, about feeling unwanted. The judge had to stop proceedings multiple times. Dimma would break down, the jury would be sent out, the judge would warn him, "Compose yourself, control your emotions, this can't continue." But how do you control emotions when your entire broken life is being dissected in public? When strangers are analyzing your trauma, when victims' families are glaring at you with pure hatred, when you're facing the possibility of life in prison? Dimma's adoptive parents showed up for part of the trial. They sat in the back. They looked devastated. This was the boy they tried to save, and now he was on trial for murder. They wondered if they could have done something different, if they could have prevented this. During a break, Dimma's adoptive mother tried to approach him. Dimma turned away, couldn't face her, couldn't handle seeing the disappointment in her eyes.
The trial lasted 2 weeks. Witness after witness, expert after expert, crime scene photos, forensic evidence, psychological evaluations, character witnesses, victim statements. The jury heard everything. Heard about Dimma's tragic past, heard about his mental health issues, but they also heard about 2 men who died violently, heard about the devastated families left behind, heard about the choices Dimma made that night. Closing arguments came. The prosecution reminded the jury that this case is about justice for the victims, not sympathy for the defendant. 2 men are dead. Dimma Tower killed them. That's murder. Find him guilty. The defense made their final plea. This is a broken person who never had a chance, who was abandoned as a child, who suffered trauma no child should suffer, who acted out of extreme emotional disturbance. This isn't murder. This is manslaughter. Show mercy. The judge gave jury instructions. Explained the difference between first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and manslaughter. Explained reasonable doubt. Explained how to evaluate evidence. Then sent them to deliberate. The jury was out for 3 days. 3 long days of deliberation. That usually means they're divided. Some want murder. Some want manslaughter. They're arguing, debating, reviewing evidence. Dimma waited in jail. His lawyer visited him, told him to prepare for any outcome. Could be first-degree murder with life in prison. Could be manslaughter with a much shorter sentence. No way to know until the jury comes back. On the 3rd day, word came. The jury reached a verdict. Everyone was called back to court. Dimma was brought in wearing his orange jumpsuit. He looked terrified. The victims' families filled the gallery. They wanted to see justice, wanted to see Dimma get what he deserved. The judge entered, everyone stood, then sat. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. The judge asked the jury foreman if they'd reached a verdict. The foreman, an older woman, stood up. She said, "Yes, Your Honor, we have." The clerk took the verdict form. "Read it aloud." "In the matter of the State versus Dimma Tower, on the charge of murder in the first degree for victim 1, we the jury find the defendant not guilty." Dimma's shoulders sagged with relief. "Not first degree. That's life in prison. He might have a chance." The clerk continued. "On the charge of murder in the second degree for victim 1, we the jury find the defendant guilty." Dimma's face fell. "Second-degree murder, that's still 15 to 30 years." The same verdicts came for victim 2, "Not guilty of first degree, guilty of second degree." The judge thanked the jury, set a date for sentencing, and that was it. Dimma Tower was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder. He would spend decades in prison. The victims' families were relieved. Justice, not perfect justice. They wanted first degree, but at least he'd be locked up for a very long time. Dimma was led away in handcuffs. He looked back at his adoptive parents one time. They were crying. He mouthed, "I'm sorry." Then he was gone. Sentencing came a month later. The judge had to balance justice for the victims with consideration for Dimma's mental health and background. The prosecution asked for the maximum, 60 years total, 30 for each victim consecutive. Make sure this man never gets out. The defense asked for leniency, 25 years total. With credit for time served and good behavior, Dimma could be out in his early 40s. Give him a chance at life after prison. The judge listened to final statements, heard from the victims' families again, heard from Dimma, who apologized through tears, said he thinks about what he did every day, wishes he could take it back, knows sorry isn't enough. Then the judge made his decision. "On count 1, second-degree murder, I sentence you to 25 years in state prison. On count 2, second-degree murder, I sentence you to 25 years in state prison. These sentences will run concurrently, meaning at the same time. Total sentence, 25 years. With good behavior, Dimma could be eligible for parole in about 18 years. He'd be in his early 40s, still have part of his life ahead of him." Timestamp 0033 0000 3500. Dimma Tower is currently serving his sentence at a state prison. According to his lawyer, he's participating in mental health programs, getting the therapy he should have gotten years ago, working through his trauma, learning to process emotions in healthy ways. He's also expressed interest in helping other inmates with similar backgrounds, other men who came from foster care, other men who never dealt with their childhood trauma, trying to turn his story into something that might help someone else avoid the path he took. The victims' families are still grieving. They'll never get their loved ones back. No sentence brings them back. No amount of time in prison heals that wound. But some of them have said they hope Dimma gets help in prison, that he becomes a different person, that he finds some kind of redemption, because hate and anger don't bring back the dead. They just create more pain. This case raises difficult questions. How much does childhood trauma excuse adult behavior? At what point is someone responsible for their actions regardless of their past? How do we balance justice for victims with mercy for defendants who are clearly broken? There are no easy answers. Dimma Tower's story is tragic from beginning to end. A nobody from nowhere who ended up taking 2 lives, who will spend the best years of his adult life in prison, who may never fully recover from the trauma that shaped him. This is his story, and it's a reminder that sometimes the line between victim and perpetrator is more blurred than we'd like to admit. Sometimes people who do terrible things are also people terrible things were done to, and justice has to somehow account for all of that. Dimma Tower, 22 years old when convicted, now facing decades behind bars, a life defined by abandonment, trauma, and one terrible night that can never be undone.